Welcome to Legalized Negligence, where we discuss Florida Statute 768.21, subsection 8. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. I've got two guests with me. The lady on the top left of my screen is my sister, Tavi Fontana, and the lady at the bottom of the screen has been on a couple of podcasts with me so far, Missy Bradley Ball, and she is a counselor. And Missy, if you would give us a very brief introduction to what you do. If anyone's watched our other podcasts with you in it, that they already know, but we might get some new viewers.
Okay. As a counselor, I'm also in the role of a clinical trainer. So I train psychologists, social workers, clergy, psychiatrists, and nurses in trauma and traumatic loss.
Okay. And what we're going to do today is my sister mentioned to me a couple of months ago that she's never really talked about when our mom died back in May of 2020, and that she felt a desire to do that. And I asked her, would she be willing to do that in a podcast with me? Because I want to make this available not only to the people who usually watch our videos, but also to the legislators in the state of Florida so that they can see what their subsection 8 statute is doing to families when we're unable to take doctors and nurses to court and hold them accountable for their negligence. And I thought if Tavi was able to tell her story and talk to Missy a little bit about it, then maybe they could see just how devastating it is to people when they have no recourse. When they can't do anything. And the biggest part of that is that these doctors and nurses are still practicing because it never gets to court and they're never held accountable. They're still out there at the bedside. So I'm going to go ahead and duck out of the picture here and let Tavi and Missy take over. And ladies,
Thank you.
whoops,
Let me start and say thank you, Tavi, for being here. Your story is really important, and I know that telling the grief story the first time, particularly in such a public arena, is really brave and courageous and very hard. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
So, so as I just heard, the the loss of your mom occurred in May of 2020. Can you tell us how this came about, and maybe even leading up into her stay in the facility, etc.?
Sure. Well, COVID had just come on scene in March of 2020, and the world was getting conflicting stories of what to do, where to go, stay home, don't stay home. And my mom had chronic asthma all her life. My mom was 92 at the time, and but a very vibrant and spunky 92. Still had all her faculties and her sense of humor and all of that. Just couldn't drive and go to get groceries and things like that. She had lived with me for 5 years and then really wanted her own place. So she had gotten her own apartment. And the last 3 years of her life, she lived on her own in her apartment. But of course, I was interacting with her daily, phone, in person, because I took groceries. I took her to her doctor's appointments and things like that. But she took care of herself. But getting back to how this all came about, she had chronic asthma her entire life. And during this time of COVID starting up, was having some breathing problems, and she would do her breathing treatments on her nebulizer and things like that. But you're really not supposed to use those for many consecutive days if it's not doing any help. Finally, after a few weeks of her struggling with her breathing, I convinced her to see her primary care doctor. She was nervous about going anywhere because at the time everybody was saying, stay home. Unless you're on your deathbed, do not go to the hospital. And so she heeded those warnings. But I did finally take her to her primary care doctor, Dr. Vega, and I just called him and he said, yes, bring her in. And I took her in. She walked in on her own. And he did an exam and said, she's not getting any air through her airways. You need to take her to the emergency room. So this was April 29th. Ironically, that was my mom and dad's wedding anniversary, just as a little side note. So we headed to the ER and was having regular conversation on the way there. As a matter of fact, her primary care doctor is located in Auburndale, Florida. And mom lived in Auburndale when she was a young girl. And her aunt lived there as well. And we were on the way to the emergency room and we saw the sign, Bridgers Street. She said, that's where Aunt Alma lived. I mean, I say that because she had her wits about her. And it's very important that people know that. 92 years old, she remembered where her aunt lived, what road it was, Anyway, we get to the hospital and I left her in the vehicle because I didn't know what the procedure was because of COVID.
It was new.
It was very new. I mean, we were maybe 6 weeks into COVID at that point. So I was greeted by a police officer at the emergency room door and someone who was also employed by the emergency room, by the hospital, Winter Haven Hospital, and explained the situation. And they said, okay, we're going to get a wheelchair and we'll bring her in. So they did. And I walked up with her. Well, they didn't let me go in the building, not even the first door of the building. They just took her. And I explained to that nurse as well as that person who greeted me along with the police officer that she's 92 and she's very aware and very with it. However, she's 92. So she may not be able to answer all your questions about medications and things like that. This is my name. I'm her daughter. This is my phone number. The nurse and the doctors are going to need to contact me because I'm going to have to help with those questions. If I can't be there with her to make sure she's answering them correctly, you're going to have to contact me. It wasn't my fault that I couldn't come into the hospital. And I tried to make that clear to everyone I spoke with. Shortly after that, I did receive a phone call from someone who had checked her in and told me, she was in the ER waiting to see the doctor. And I reiterated, they're going to have to call me. I did get a call from a nurse. I did get a call from a doctor. And I explained that same thing. I was asked some questions, about her cognitive state. She was fine. She had never been diagnosed with any kind of dementia or anything like that. And I made that very clear. But I also needed to make clear that she is 92. And every now and then, just like me, I forget where I misplaced and so she's not going to be able to remember everything. And it was yes, we'll call you, the whole thing. She was admitted and given breathing treatments, and I would call the nurses station and check. And at this point, it was just, she had asthma. She really just needed steroids and a good breathing treatment and send her home, basically. we had been there before. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. And so, I tell her goodnight on, the phone that night in her hospital room. And then the next morning I call it. I always was aware of shift change being at 7. So I would always wait till shift change and give them maybe 10 or 15 minutes to get settled in. And I would call. I would call every day, those first few days, around 3 to 4 times a day, just to check in, see how she was doing, because I couldn't physically be with her and she was alone. I
And
mean,
you
she was,
normally would have been if it hadn't been for COVID.
oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely would have been there with her. Um, but I would call in the morning, I would call at lunch and check in, I would call at dinner time and check in after, shift change in the evening. Um, and there was a purpose to that as well, because I wanted to get the different nurses' opinions. So I didn't want to talk to the same nurse at 7:30 at night that I had talked to at lunch, because I wanted to see what the differences were between. But at that point, everything was fine. They loved mom. Mom had this way about her. Everybody loved mom. I mean, we would joke as kids and say, yeah, well, you don't live with her, but everybody says that about their parents, right? At some point. But she had her way with people, and everybody loved her. Then, oh, she's wonderful. She's so fun. She's so happy. She's doing great. And then I would talk to mom, and I'm having a ball. I'm good. That was just mom. But that third,
Vibrant.
absolutely, absolutely. That third morning, I couldn't reach anyone, and it was odd. And I left messages for people to call. That the night before, they had said she's probably going to be released tomorrow morning, and I thought, great, that's perfect. But that morning, when I called to see when she was going to be released, I could get no one to talk with me, and I would have to check phone records. I may have called back again around lunch and left another message, but I never spoke with anyone until around 2 o'clock that afternoon. And it was her nurse, um, who I spoke with. And I said, I'm just calling to see, I was told last night she could be released today. I haven't been able to reach anyone. And uh, she said, well, she's fine, but your mom had a little fall. What do you mean she had a little fall? Well, she fell out of her bed. Well, how did she fall out of her bed? Well, she had these compression stockings on and she got up to go to the bathroom. And I could hear my mom in the background saying, "It was my fault. It was my fault." And I thought, what's happening? And she said, and she got tripped up, but she's okay. And I talked to mom. I said, Mom, what happened? And she basically said the same thing. I got up to go to the bathroom and I forgot I had those compression stockings on. And, you know, uh, but I'm fine. I'm fine. But again, that's mom. Um,
To
my mom is a survivor. I mean, and we were brought up that way. It's 4 children of hers who have done nothing but had to survive. And we learn from the best. And we don't want to bother anyone. We don't want to make, waves. We don't want to, if it's okay, it's okay. We're strong, we're tough, that kind of. And so that was just what I thought it was. It wasn't until 5 days later that we found out that mom had 5 broken ribs from that fall.
wow.
And
And how did you find that out?
well, it was an exhausting, frustrating several days, because if I was calling 3 and 4 times a day those first couple of days, I was calling 6 and 7 times a day each day after that, because you had a different nurse, you had a different doctor, you had a different PT person, you had a different charge nurse, you had I had names and notes and documentation and times and everything, writing stuff down because I do not have a medical background. And so I was trying to gather as much information as possible as I could to find out what was going on. And when I found out she fell, I don't remember exactly when I contacted Philip, but I did contact Philip. I believe I had contacted both Philip and our younger brother, or well, he's my older brother, but Philip's younger brother, um, to let them know that mom was in the hospital. But it was just to let them know she was in the hospital. It wasn't because at that point it was just the asthma. But when she fell, of course, I was telling Philip what was going on. And, I told him that day and he said, you need to get the incident report. So I called to request the incident report, that day. And, because we couldn't see her. We
Right.
couldn't go visit her. We
You
couldn't
didn't
lay
have any
eyes
way
on
to
her.
assess that other than
No,
her voice and what staff was
absolutely.
saying.
And mom just didn't really understand what was going on either, to be frank. Um, she just kind of did what she was told.
Okay.
And with us not being able to lay eyes on her, it was very difficult. I even remember they asked me, well, do you have an iPhone? Because we can do a Zoom or whatever with an iPhone. I said, no, actually, I have an Android. Can you not do it with an Android? Well, no. Somehow magically they could not do it with an Android. And I said, well, if you can't do that, they were saying she had some bruising. That's all they kept saying. She has some bruising. Well, some bruising is
Yeah.
relative.
Yes.
And I wanted to see the bruising. I said, can you take pictures? Can you send? Nope, can't do that because of HIPAA. And, it was just one thing after another. But finally, we were told that she had the 5 broken ribs. Her shoulder was a little sore. Uh, that was the original complaint, just the shoulder. And then, oh, yeah, by the way, she has 5 broken ribs. And it just dominoed from there.
How was your mom's um, behavior or her vibrance after this? Did you notice a big difference with her?
Not immediately.
Okay.
It took a handful of days, because things were happening, as we now know, that since we've,
Mhm.
received the medical records and found out exactly what was happening to her. She had things going on internally that we had no idea. And we were not getting answers to our questions. We weren't getting the incident report. We weren't, it was we were getting tossed around basically. And
Did you notice? Did you understand that at the time? Did it feel like frustrating or?
it did actually. It was palpable. Even I knew, without having a medical background, even I knew something is not right here. And when I really knew it, to sort of go back to your previous question of did her demeanor or vibrance change, at one point I talked to her on the phone and I knew that something was terribly wrong because she couldn't speak clearly.
Mm.
She was slurring. All she kept saying to me over and over and over again is, I love you, 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 I love you. And I said, Mom, what's going on? What are you okay? What's happening? And I said, let me talk to the nurse. She put the nurse back on the phone and I said, what's going on with my mom? She doesn't sound right. She's not making any sense. oh, she's fine. She just had some of her lunch and she had some tea. And I said, no, 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 no. Something is not right. Is she having a seizure? Is she having a stroke? Something's not right. So, yes, at that point, it was very obvious that things were not right.
Okay. What was that like for you, not being able to see her and trying to advocate from a distance?
It was infuriating. It was frustrating, it was devastating, and it was angering because she was helpless.
Mhm. It
She was
sounds like
helpless.
you felt helpless as
Oh,
well.
I was. I was very helpless. I mean, she was literally 2 miles away from me from my home, and I couldn't see her. And I didn't understand, if a doctor or a nurse or a social worker can put on a mask and gloves and a gown and go see her, then why couldn't I? And as a matter of fact, one of the nurses, one of the male nurses, his name was, well, I don't know if I should say the name, but anyway, he suggested to me that I speak to the administrator on duty because he explained that sometimes they will allow a patient a person to, as he said, gear up and go in and see their loved one. So I thought, great, So I did try to contact the administrator on duty. I left 2 voice messages explaining just what the nurse had told me.
Mhm.
And when I finally did receive a call back from the administrator on duty, I was appalled. Um, she, to put it frankly, was rude and uncaring and definitely someone who should not be working in a hospital when you're supposed to be caring for people and their family. But she told me, I spoke to the nurse you spoke to, and I asked him, is her mother going to die today? And he said he didn't think it would be today. Um, and that she told me that because I pushed a little bit about coming to see her, and she said, well, we can let you come see her for 15 minutes to say your goodbyes, but if she digresses after that, you can't come back to see her.
That must have been stunning, not realizing that she was in as bad a shape as that this vibrant woman just a few days before.
Oh yeah, we had no idea just how bad she was. And as the days were adding up, it was more and more angering and frustrating, and you just feel so helpless because something's not right. It doesn't take a PhD or an MD to understand
Mm-hmm.
that something is not right. And it wasn't.
So the person that was vibrant a few days before now had 5 broken ribs, some bruising, and was repeating, I love you, I love you, I love you, but was also slurring. So a really dramatic difference than last time that you had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was apparent, it would have been apparent to a child that something wasn't right.
Okay.
So, you know, the days went on and shift change, with doctors, and we're dealing with several different doctors. And it's probably a good point to make that my mom's primary care doctor, who I respect and adore to this day, was not a doctor at this hospital, so he did not have rights to go see her for us.
Wow.
That needs to be stated and clear. He was guiding me with some things to try and follow up on medical
So you had a
things.
little bit of an ally in the PC.
Some, but he was also not. He was being professional and not involving himself more than he should have, and for ethical reasons, I'm sure. But yes, there was, at least in the beginning of when we found out that she fell, yeah, ask about these numbers and these numbers and these numbers, what her bin number was, and those kinds of things. I would ask the questions. I would write down what I was being told, but then I would call my brother Philip and say, okay, this is what I'm being told. What does this mean?
Hmm.
And Philip also began getting involved in calling the hospital as well after she fell, because she fell in a hospital bed.
Mhm.
And it's fair to note as well that my brother Philip does have a medical background. He was in the Navy, and he was a corpsman, I believe is what they call it, and a darn good one, I might add. He did receive accommodations for it, but that was a long time ago. But he still has stayed involved and learning and educating himself, so he knew what all of these things meant, and I didn't. So he knew probably sooner than I that this was not going to end well. Um, we finally got on a conference call, my brother and I did. Um, we thought it was going to be with, I believe, a charge nurse, a doctor, and maybe a social worker. I think we had anticipated only 3 people and the 2 of us. And when we got on the conference call, there were 7 people there.
Wow.
And that was a red flag as well. Couple doctors, I believe, some administrators, a handful of nurses. So again, not having a medical background, I knew this is not normal,
Mhm.
you know. And in that first call, my brother mostly took the lead because he knew the questions to ask. And I will never forget it. In the middle of one of his questions, one of the doctors interrupted him and said, "Are you a doctor?"
Mhm.
And he said, "No, sir, I am not. I have a medical background." I don't know his exact wording, but he definitely told them he was not a doctor. But the doctor knew that he was asking the questions that they should have given us the answers to, because we then would have known exactly what was wrong. But we just got pushed around and pushed around and pushed around, handed off to other people. And it was a nightmare. Mom was there for Mother's Day. She was in the hospital on Mother's Day, May 11th. And the male nurse who had suggested that I contact the administrator on duty, he was on duty on Mother's Day. And I said, "I'd like to get some flowers to Mom." And he was kind enough to meet me downstairs outside the hospital building to take a dozen roses to Mom for Mother's Day. Um, which I might add, when she left the hospital, they wouldn't let her take with her. But nevertheless, um, it was just, it's Mother's Day. She's hurting. She's got 5 broken ribs. At that point, I believe she had already had to have 1,000 cc's. I believe it's a liter. A bag, an IV bag is a liter, and she had 900 cc's of blood drawn out of her lungs and chest, and all of that was because of the broken ribs. She had been through a lot, and we found out later, after we got the medical records, that she had coded twice. We didn't know that. They didn't let us know that. Even
Even though you had contact with
oh my gosh,
medical people.
those people were so sick of me calling, but I didn't care because that was my mother and she was hurt and I didn't know what was going on. And I had already been treated poorly by the administrator on duty, and my brother and I had already been tossed around like these. They'll forget about it. They're not going to fight. They're not going to figure it out. They're not going to. You could just feel that type of thought process in the air. It was what they were used to. Most families don't know what to ask. Thankfully, I had my brother to ask the questions, but most don't, and they get frustrated with the red tape. But thankfully, my brother's a warrior,
Not
and he's
deterred
still
by red.
absolutely not. As a matter of fact, that probably fuels his fire and mine as well. But he's just a lot better at it than I am. But yeah, we found out she had coded twice. We finally, I believe we had another conference call with roughly the same amount of people, same number of people. Again, not getting answers. And finally, we decided that we needed someone to get eyes on her. So we contacted hospice. And she's the one who let us know that mom had coded twice because she was allowed to read the chart. And she was the one who let us know that it wasn't just some bruising. My mother was bruised the entire side of her body, partially in front, partially in back, her groin area. It was, we didn't know. She told us that she was bruised that way, but until you see it, you don't. No. It's and we didn't see it until the day we moved her into hospice. She had spent 2 weeks at Winter Haven Hospital. She was supposed to be there 2.5 days, 3 days roughly, and they were already talking about discharging her because her asthma was fine. She was breathing fine. And she was there 2 weeks because of what they did to her. This nurse didn't have her bed alarm on. The nurse didn't have the bed rails up like she was supposed to. The PT person who went in to give my mother her I think what was supposed to be her last breathing treatment and test before they released her to go home. She is the one, and I have to meet this woman because I'm thankful that she was truthful and honest in her reporting and did her job. She was the one who told the nurse on duty, hey, her bed alarm isn't on. You want me to turn it on? And the nurse just nonchalantly replies, no, that's okay. I'm going to be walking down there in a little bit anyway. And it was shortly after that that my mother fell out of her bed. And there are many factors as to why she fell. She was having to urinate a lot because they had her on Lasix and some other things, but she wasn't taking in food. So they had, in the medical records, they had some other patients' records in our mother's medical records.
So she wasn't needing Lasix.
Well, now that would be a question for Philip. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I think maybe initially, but when they started noticing things like kidney issues, nothing I think was done. That same regimen was upheld. And I may not be using the right wording. I'm just saying that from the very beginning. Oh, and I probably should have said this from the beginning too. They did give my mom two different COVID-19 tests when she came into the hospital, and I think the next day, and they were both negative. She never had COVID, ever.
Okay.
Not even prior to going into the hospital. She never had COVID. And they noted that she did not have COVID. So, you know,
So the having something go downhill so quickly had nothing to do with her asthma.
nope,
She didn't have COVID. She was vibrant, and then suddenly, corresponding with this fall, that's when everything began to fall apart.
sure. And imagine, I mean, she's 92. She was hard of hearing and she was hard headed. She didn't want to wear hearing aids. um, but she had macular degeneration, so she didn't see great. I would take her to get shots in her eyes. Um, Still, like I said,
So
alert and
vulnerable,
aware.
very vulnerable, even though
Absolutely.
she was very vibrant.
And plus, they put her on blood thinners and things that her primary care doctor had taken her off a year before. So she was on a couple different blood thinners. She was on this diuretic and Lasix and all this stuff, and it began to take effect on her, and it made her. There was a note, I believe, where they would walk her or see how well she would walk, before the fall. And she would be walking fine. And then when all this medication started taking effect and getting in, they noted jerky walking and things like that. There were many, many, many signs that I don't know, common sense should tell you, but if you're a trained nurse or doctor, you should definitely know something is not right. Did we get something
Particularly
wrong?
from
Did
the
we?
first,
Yeah,
the entry into.
from the very beginning. And the thing is I was so adamant from the beginning. You guys have to call me. You have to call me. I have to tell you what medication she's on and what the milligrams are. She's not going to know that. It was just, I have empathy for the fact that everybody was new to COVID.
Yes.
However, I'll say it again. If a doctor or a nurse or a social worker can wear a mask and gloves and gown and go see a patient, then I should have been able to do that as well and not be
Particularly
told, go
with
say your
their,
goodbyes,
yes,
you know?
particularly with their perception that she was um, declining quickly.
Quickly, yes,
In their view, that that and
quickly. One of the doctors noted, and this was later in her 2 week stay at the hospital, he used the word iatrogenic, and I believe that's how it's pronounced. I don't have the Webster definition right in front of me, but it basically means what the doctors did, the actions they took, basically started that domino effect of everything else happening. Had not this started, then this wouldn't have happened, and then this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened. There were many things, and that's on record from a
what's
doctor.
it like to sit with that piece of information?
I hate to say that it's angering because I'm not an angry person, but it is because that doctor who noted that in the medical records, I believe, should have upheld his oath and done the right thing and said, we messed up.
Mhm.
We messed up. We're human. We can do that. But they didn't own up to that. And
Mistakes can happen,
sure,
but there was no transparency.
none, zero. And as a matter of fact, the PT person who I said one day I hope I get to meet, who put in the records that the bed alarm was not on and verified to be told to keep it off by the nurse. When the code was sounded that someone had fallen, that PT person went back to the nurse and said, what happened? And the nurse said, well, she fell, the compression stocking and the tubing, it happens.
Mm.
That's in the medical record. This nurse says, it happens. But this is the same nurse who said, no, don't turn the bed alarm on. I'll be walking that way soon anyway. I've never met this person, but that to me comes across as a lazy person who does not want to do their job and did not do their job and then had no remorse for it at all. Zero. The way she told me on the phone that mom fell was, oh, by the way, she had a little fall today. A little fall?
Yeah.
5 broken ribs, bleeding internally.
Yeah.
Died.
Yeah.
I'd say that's more than a little fall.
Yeah.
We took her to hospice, I think on that 15th day. And it was about midday, 1 or 2. And I was there, of course, mask, even in hospice, you had to wear a mask until you got in the room with your parent or whomever was in the room. And they came and got me and said, okay, we have her situated, you can come see her now.
And you had not seen her since
2
the
weeks.
ER.
It had been 15 days.
Okay.
And that wasn't even normal in everyday life. I mean, I saw her on a regular basis. But the lady, as she's walking me back, it was their social worker, whatever that title is at the hospice. She said, you might want to take pictures. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, there's bruising. I thought, okay. And I got in, and there was probably 5 people in the staff in the room when I first walked in, and mom. And my mom, I have a mask on, and my mom greets me with, hey, baby, that's my 40-year-old birthday present, because she was 40 when I was born. That's important to note, because even at that point, with everything that she had been through, she was still that, hey, baby, that's my daughter. That's my 40th birthday present. She was still a happy, positive, upbeat, she just didn't want to make trouble kind of person. And I looked at everybody and I said, can I take this mask off? And they said, yeah, take it off. So I gave her a hug and asked her if she was okay. And yes. And I don't think that I truly had accepted what was going to happen, since she was in hospice. And I'm pretty sure she didn't know, because I asked her, Mom, do you know where you are? And she said, I'm at Auburndale Hospital. And the hospice was in Auburndale. They told her she was going to Auburndale. So she assumed she was in Auburndale Hospital. I didn't have the guts to tell her she was in hospice. I never asked my brother if he told her. But she said, yeah, I'm in Auburndale Hospital. And I said, okay. And I said, Mom, I need to take some pictures. I know there's some bruising. Yeah, well, it took 3 of them to roll her over on her side and she's 5 foot tall. I mean, probably weighed 145 pounds, not a big woman. But because of the injury, yes. And they rolled her onto her left side and pulled the sheet down. It was bad. I mean, whew, it was bad. I took, I don't know, 7 or 8 pictures of her body, purple and black. Excuse me.
Okay. Take your time. Take your time.
But I sent the pictures to my 2 brothers. And, Philip immediately was on the phone with me and we were talking about it. I remember the response. My sister-in-law of my other brother, because I sent it to both of them and Philip. She used to be a nurse. And her response was, "My God." I mean, it was her body, almost her entire right side, her breast, her groin, everything purple. And the person who at hospice who told me you should take pictures, she pulled me aside and said, "You need to contact the police department and you need to file a report today." And so I did. I filed a report. The police officer met me outside the police station in his vehicle, and he did whatever they do to pull things up, records up at the hospital, because it's my understanding that if there's a fall, an incident in a hospital, you're supposed to report it to DCF. And they had not done that. And she had fallen 10, 12 days prior, and they still had not reported it because her name wasn't in the system. The police officer told me that. I used to work for the city of Winter Haven, and so I knew the police chief. And I called him from hospice and I explained, what was going on. And of course, he said the normal niceties and things that you do. And if there's anything I can do, whatever. He's the one who actually pointed me in the direction of going to the police station and filing the report. But there were just so many things. I stayed with Mom for 4 nights in hospice until my brother Philip could get there. And then he stayed with her quite a bit. She was only there for a week, and she died on the 20th of May. The doctor there was phenomenal at hospice. She agreed to speak over speakerphone with my brother Philip about what was going on, and until he could get down to Florida, because he didn't live in Florida. And I don't know, hospice, I know everybody's supposed to be kind because it's hospice, but they were wonderful. But they had told us, the blood is going to start filling up again. And it's going to be hard for her to breathe. Now, we can pull that blood off of her lungs. We'll have to take her back to the hospital to do that. But also that it was just going to continue to happen. There was no way my mom was going to survive. And so we chose not to have the blood relieved from her lungs again. And she lived 7 days there and then died.
What was the 7 days like?
Well, the first 3 days and nights that I stayed with my mom in hospice, and they let me sleep overnight with her there and shower there and all of that. We had fun. We watched old silly TV shows together, and we just talked about old days. We sang, and I don't know if she knew that she was gonna die. I don't know. I couldn't tell her. I just pretended that she was at the hospital. And the fourth day was when you could tell the blood was starting to pool again, because it was getting harder for her to breathe. And I believe that was the day that Philip was able to, make the drive down and get down and be with mom and spend some good quality time with her. She was still awake, and they were giving her morphine for the pain, of course. But she started, getting labored. It was the fifth day when my other brother decided he was going to come down as well, that she was sleeping a lot at that point. But my brother Philip had created this amazing playlist of music, all mom's favorite stuff, and we just let it play in the room, many times over.
Making her comfortable,
yeah, and just her favorite songs and things that made her happy and made her smile over life. And it was, I'm sorry, just 1 second.
Take your time.
I was really glad when my brother Philip had arrived, because that point I felt like I'd been doing it all myself. I mean, I hadn't, because he had been handling so much with the doctors and the medical records and all of that, but it was
But you had
comforting.
been not allowed in the hospital, and
No, and I was right there. I mean, I was right there, and no, and it was I was glad he was there, and I was able to get maybe a little bit of sleep here and there once he arrived. But those 7 days, it's very strange to know that you're having a conversation with someone you love, and they're going to die soon, like literally expire soon, because there is no way to recover from what she had gone through. It's a very I know medical people deal with it all the time, but this was my mom. This is my mom, and she wasn't perfect, but she sure did love her kids, and she was the definition of the lioness protecting her cubs whenever they needed it. She loved us. We knew she loved us, but she loved us that way because that was the only way she knew how. She was a survivor. I mean, she was born in 1927. She went through the Depression. She went through wars, and she brought up 4 children by herself, and she had a tough life. And that's not to say that people don't. No one deserves to die the way that she did, and it adds insult to injury when it wasn't her fault.
Mhm. And that there wasn't ownership of.
That's yes. The even to this day,
Mm.
no, the closest that we have even come to that is that one doctor who used that word iatrogenic, you know, um, but because of the laws in Florida, because we were all over the age of 26, doesn't matter,
What
you
was
know.
it like to find that out about the law? I imagine most people in that situation don't know about the law
No,
until way after, if they do
right.
at all.
Well, that's true with anything, right?
Yeah.
Until we're in the middle of something,
Yes.
having to experience it ourselves, uh, we don't know. And I guess that's how we learn. And that's the purpose of this podcast is to educate people, especially people with legislation who can change this law.
Right.
And this law needs to be changed.
Right.
Just because I was 52 when my mother died doesn't mean that I don't deserve the same rights that someone who's 26.
Right.
And yeah, that was very, very frustrating to learn. And the thing about it is my siblings and I, from the very beginning, when we discussed, okay, what is going to be our plan of action? Because this is not right. We need justice for our mother. It was never about money. It was about people and their licenses and the oaths that they took. They should not be there. And by the way, they are still employed there. This nurse is still employed at Winter Haven Hospital. And I, I, I moved away from Florida 10 months ago, but for 4 years after mom's death, I couldn't drive by that hospital. I just couldn't drive by. I couldn't look at it. Every one of my friends close enough to me who knows that if something were to happen to me, do not take me to that hospital. They know. Um,
And it sounds like it wasn't as much about the accident, but what happened in terms of owning it, not hiding it. I
yes,
mean,
there is no
the mistake is
transparency.
bad enough,
Oh yeah.
but the other part
Well,
sounds.
that coupled with, it's important to note that they didn't follow hospital procedure.
Okay.
I believe it's people over the age of 85. I think that's the right number. Don't quote me on that. Um, but people who are at high risk for falls on certain medications, the list goes on, that it's standard policy procedure that the bed rails are up, the bed is in the lowest position, the light or the call button is in
Mhm.
reach. She's supposed to have a band on that's saying she's a fall risk. And that the bed alarm is supposed to be on. It's just procedure that in and of itself to me should be enough for these people to lose their license.
Yes.
I don't make the laws though, so we're doing what little we can. My brother's done an enormous amount of work, and I have faith and confidence in him that he's gonna get something.
Try to protect other families in
Absolutely.
going through what you all went through.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, when something happens to you and you're telling a story and someone will say, "Oh, that happened to my uncle," or that happened. I cannot tell you probably three different people. As a matter of fact, one of the owners of the crematory that we used had a lawsuit against the same hospital because of the death of, I want to say it was her father, and won. There was just many people who came and said, well, that happened to so and so, and that happened. I would never take anybody that hospital again. And you hear about that, and you think, then why hasn't something been done up until now? And I guess maybe it took this family to get something going.
Right.
Because it happens more often than people realize.
Yes.
And it's very hard to deal with when you can't get a straight answer, when you can't get an answer at all, you can't get a return phone call, you're spoken to like you're some, gnat that's annoying you.
When you're
It's
advocating for one of the most important people in your life.
absolutely, absolutely. And she couldn't advocate for herself. She
Particularly after the fall.
absolutely. And again, you not you, but people, I want them to understand that who she was as a person, she was not going to make waves. Now, had it been one of her children,
The
that
mama
hospital
bear
would have been turned upside down. I have no doubt. But yeah, it's she was just doing what she was told to do, and the hospital and the doctors and the nurses, and especially the nurse who was on duty the day my mother fell, did not do their job. They did not follow procedures that were policies in place and had been for years, and it's just hard to swallow that that person is still at someone's bedside.
I've heard that in other countries, that when a mistake happens in a medical facility, that the doctors or medical staff take ownership and apologize to the family. That wouldn't bring your mother back, but what would that have been like for you? She would still have passed from that, but what would it have been like for there to be an ownership of, we made a mistake? What would that?
It certainly would have helped. Obviously, it wouldn't have been what we would have wanted, because we wouldn't have wanted this to happen in it to begin with. But it's like in a relationship with someone, if you can just look at the person and say, I was wrong, I did something wrong, or I didn't do something correctly, that sort of softens the way that other person feels, right? Does that make sense?
It begins
Sure.
the repair. And how has it impacted your trust in the medical community?
Well,
you've had some really great examples with your primary care, hospice, PT. You've had some wonderful things to say about them. How has it impacted your overall trust?
It's scary. It's scary to know that this type of law is out there.
Yeah.
And I think what's more scary about that is that people don't know until they're in the situation. And it's too late at that point. And so, a lot of people don't like government for certain reasons. I don't like hospitals for this specific reason, not to group all hospitals, in the same category. But for me, I've learned that you truly have to vet what you're getting into, number one.
Okay.
But in this case, with COVID, we couldn't even do that properly.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So yeah, there is distrust of hospitals. I feel, probably the same way I feel about big pharma. It's all about money. It's all about the codes. It's all about, and by codes, I mean how many codes can they add, to the chart, so the hospital can get money. Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel. And I have friends who are nurses, and I have friends who are doctors, and I adore them and I love them, and I am proud of what they do for a living. And not everyone is negligent like this nurse was and like this hospital was. Um, but it sticks in your side. It does. I mean, look at me. It's 4 years, 5 months, and 8 days since my mom died. And it's still very raw. I don't I don't talk about it. Number one, we couldn't talk about it at first for legal reasons.
Mhm.
Um, and then, you just don't, because it hurts to go there. It's painful. It's painful to think that my mom laid on the floor, you know, needing help because of a nurse not putting a bed alarm on or the bed rails up. Like, how easy is that to do?
Uh,
It's one of the easiest
Needless
jobs.
suffering, needless suffering, not only to your mom, but also to all who loved her.
I honestly, yes, you're exactly right. And I honestly don't know how this particular nurse sleeps at night. I have questioned that. I thought, how do you, I know doctors and nurses lose patience. It's not that. It's she didn't do her job.
Mhm.
Plain and simple. She didn't uphold her oath. Plain and simple. She casually, nonchalantly said, "Nah, don't turn the alarm on. I'll be down there soon."
Mhm.
I'm sorry. She should not be a nurse anymore, not only in the state of Florida, but anywhere, in my opinion.
It sounds like that it wasn't only that nurse, that
Oh,
there had to be, um, there was more than her initial mistake
oh
that
yes.
impacted you all.
Oh yeah, the medications that the first doctor put her on played a large role in how mom got to the point of why she needed to urinate and get up out of the bed. Um, and
And
it's
probably
very,
urgently.
oh yes, oh yes.
Right?
She had just gone to the restroom some few minutes before and still needed to go. And again, yeah, it's in the medical record. The nurse said, "Why did you get out of your bed?" And she said, "Well, I had to go to the bathroom and I didn't want to wet the bed."
So she
Let
had
that
the awareness of,
let that sink in. Absolutely. Let that sink in. She didn't want to wet the bed. This 92-year-old woman who had gone through
still
the Great
has
Depression, World War
agency.
II. Yes. And she still had her enough awareness that she just wanted to go to the bathroom, but she forgot that the stockings were on. But had the bed rails been up and the bed alarm been on,
She,
the nurse would have been alerted to the movement in the bed. Now, with this particular nurse, who knows how quickly she would have gone. But that's neither here nor there.
Tavi, what are some of the things you miss about your mom?
My mom was my biggest fan. I truly think she thought I could do no wrong, and I've done so many things wrong in my life, but she she just had so much faith in me and believed in me that I could do anything. And you hear that a lot from people, but with her it was different. She was 40 years older than me, so we had a very special relationship. My brothers were 7, 9, and 11 years older than I, and so they were out of the house.
Right. And it
By
was
the
almost
time
like
just
two
the two of us.
families with that age difference. But
Yes, absolutely. But it was mom and me from the time I was 14,
mhm,
and until I graduated high school, and then life took us where life took us. But even at that point, there was only one brother in the house for many years prior to that. And he was he was older, 7 years older. So he was gone. He was working. He was not around. It was just mom and me.
mhm.
Um, she
Sounds
she
like
used to
she was also a friend of sorts, a confidant in the sense of the role that she had. She had many roles in your life.
yes, she my mom was a protector. Um, it's a different definition, I think, though, for someone of that age from that era
Mhm.
of being a protector. And I'd say I love you, and she'd say I love you most. That was just her thing, and she wasn't a doting mother. Uh, she wasn't a pampering mother. We were, we again. She loved us. She would say, "I love you," and you get a hug. I'm
But
not
she
saying that
wanted you all to um, be able to make it through life.
anything and everything. And I think it's the only way she knew, because
Mhm.
that's what she had to do. I will always respect her for that and the things that she went through. But yeah, I do miss. I find myself many times just saying, oh, when was that? I need to call mom. And
Yeah,
and I know that happens to everyone, but I can't,
that's
really
really
do anything about
painful
it.
times when you reach out and have that split second of forgetting, just split second.
Right. Yeah, it happens. It happens on occasion. Um, I just, you know, I knew she was 92, but I used to say, Mom's gonna outlive us all just to spite us.
Mhm.
Mom would have been, the 105-year-old probably, had this not happened to her. And the thing is now, we are trying to make a difference in other families' lives, which is the point
So
of
her
this podcast.
legacy has meaning not only for you
Absolutely.
all, but for other people.
Listen, I wouldn't put myself out here like this if
Yeah.
I didn't feel like she deserved the justice, as well as other people who are affected by these types of laws. I'm sure there are these types of laws in other states across the US as well. We only know about, or I only know about Florida. But yeah, it's important that somehow her life makes a mark
Yes.
on this world. It has to.
Mhm. And continues to make a mark
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
in the hope of changing other people's lives, even though they may not ever know it. That
That's true.
I
I'm
think she would be
hoping.
proud of you. I never met her, but the way you've described her, that it sounds like she would have done something similar if she had had the ability to do
Yeah,
to fight for others.
she definitely would be very proud of her children, especially the work that Philip has done. It's, I'm sure it's been a daunting task for him the last 4 years with all he's had to deal with, but we're hoping that this will help.
Yes. Well, you've been very brave to tell your story today.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that, Tavi. You were talking about, what drives you and has kept you going this long, and it reminds me of a uh I was thinking, what keeps me going this long? And I saw a quote, I can't remember who it was from, but it said, never get on the wrong side of a man who buys his ink by the barrel. In other words, I ain't going away, you know.
And,
Um,
and
I,
I'm glad for that.
yeah, I ain't going away until something is done about this, or I draw my last breath, one of the two.
Yeah.
Tavi, I really appreciate you talking in public about this. I know it wasn't easy to do. Missy's seen me struggle with some of this stuff over the last 4.5 years. Um, was there anything else that y'all wanted to discuss? I've made some notes and I wanted to go back and clarify a couple of things, if that's all right, but I didn't want to interrupt if you still had something you wanted to talk about, Tavi.
No, well, I say no. One thing I would like to add, and I don't want to get into the discussion about it right now. I don't know. Maybe we do another podcast. I don't know. Um, but the what happened with the medical examiner and them not actually reading the report and first saying that she died at home, and I had to correct her and say no, she died in the hospital. And then they changed the cause of death to blunt force trauma to the body. I know we're still dealing legally. You are with the medical examiner in Florida for that, but again, maybe another podcast.
Okay. So it wasn't limited to just the hospital
Uh,
now.
uh, no, it's been absolutely every step of the way. There has been incompetence on the part of government, every step. And that's what I want the lawmakers to understand. They always kind of brush us off. And when I say us, I mean those who fall under subsection 8. They brush us off with, well, you can file a complaint with the Department of Health and they'll take care of it. That's not the truth. Now, they believe it is, because they got to get back to their strawberry shortcake festivals and the other things that they do during the year. But that's not the truth. We don't have a recourse. And there are very few that ever see any type of accountability. And there's one young woman who did get her doctor that caused her dad to die. She did get him before the Department of Medicine, and the fine was $7,500. And out of curiosity, yesterday, I don't know how it popped into my head, but it popped into my head, how does Florida deal with issues of animal cruelty? And I started looking up some of the laws. Do you know that if you interfere with certain animals in Florida, like alligators and protected species and stuff, there can be as much as a $25,000 fine and 5 years in prison. And I may be misremembering that. It might have been $250,000 fine. The point is that the wildlife in Florida is more protected than the citizens, and that's on the legislature. They wrote those laws. They wrote subsection 8 and they wrote the wildlife laws. They protect wildlife in Florida more than they protect the citizens of Florida. If you don't mind, I'd like to clarify a couple of things in case somebody watches this and says, well, that's not right, because
Right.
it was 4.5 years ago. And
Sure.
your nose hasn't been in the medical record the way that mine has been. So because of time, and it's like they always tell you, bring your suit as soon as you can because memories fade.
Sure.
Some things I just wanted to straighten out. But I want to remind everybody that in the beginning days of COVID, don't forget those dancing nurse videos that we were seeing on YouTube. At the time my mom fell and died, those videos were being posted on YouTube of nurses dancing through the hospital. And that's because the cat was away and the mice were playing. There were
Yep.
not family members there watching over their shoulders. And if anybody doubts me, go to YouTube and type in dancing nurses and look at the dates. It was in those first months of COVID in 2020. And it wasn't until the public pushed back and said, how can you be telling us how hard you're working when you're able to choreograph dance videos in empty hospital hallways? So you can tell that I get a little bit more passionate and upset about certain aspects of this, and I've just channeled my anger in a different direction. I'm going to very quickly go through this list. One was when the nurse told Tavi that she couldn't take pictures of mom because of HIPAA. That's an absolute lie. HIPAA does not affect that. HIPAA would be the hospital could not share that information with another agency or doctor's office. There was nothing that prevented them from taking pictures and showing them, except that their legal department probably told them not to.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the first thing. Them telling her about her eating, once oh, she ate just fine today. Once I got the medical record and could coordinate those, compare those dates and times, the days that they were telling her she was eating just fine, there are notes in the medical record that says she didn't touch her meals that day. So they were lying about everything. um Mom fell on the 2nd of May. On the 5th of May, Tavi got a phone call very early in the morning saying, can we transfuse your mother? And she immediately called me and said they want to give mom a transfusion. Now, remember, we had just been told that she had a little fall
Right.
and that she was okay. And at the time they said that, they had already done x rays and they knew that mom had 5 broken ribs. What they didn't know, because nobody asked the question, well, if you break 5 ribs, is it possible you tore any blood vessels when those 5 ribs broke? So she was bleeding internally for 2 days without anybody there paying attention to that. So they called and said, she needs a blood transfusion. Do we have your consent? And Tavi called me and I called the hospital back. I said, well, absolutely. If she needs blood, do what you're supposed to do. Why are you asking my consent? Give her the blood, but I want to know why she needs the blood. And the moment I asked that question, they circled the wagons and brought the lawyers in. And they knew then what they were up against. And when I had called, when Tavi called me and said mom had fallen, and I said, you need to get that incident report. They put that off until it took us actually 56 days to
Yeah.
get the incident report. They stalled us and stalled us and stalled us. They did not want us to read that incident report,
Yep.
because that's where we found out that there was a bed alarm involved in this scenario. They didn't tell us that over the telephone. It was
No.
only after I got the medical records, and I remember writing to Tavi and our brother and saying, you're not going to believe this, but there was a bed alarm on her bed. And hospital policy said that that bed alarm was supposed to be on. And the nurse not only ignored it and didn't document it, when she was put on notice by, and it was a physical therapy technician, Tavi, not a respiratory
EP.
tech.
Okay.
The physical therapy tech went in and she was actually evaluating mom's strength to see if she was going to be able to be discharged.
Right.
And she went in and did her assessment. And when she reported her assessment back to the nurse, she said, oh, and by the way, I noticed that the bed alarm isn't on. Is it supposed to be? And the nurse responded, "Oh, she's okay. I'm going down there anyway." Well, an hour and 15 minutes went by, and she either didn't go down or she went down and didn't activate the bed alarm. One of the two, because an hour and 15 minutes later, mom fell. How do I know that that's when it happened? Well, I looked in the medical record to find the last time anybody had put eyes on mom, and one of the nurse assistants wrote that she had just put her on the bedpan and took her off. I took that time. I turned over to the place in the chart where the EKGs are, and I started looking at her EKG strips. And I found where all of a sudden you get this what is called noise. It's just static on the screen. And mom laid there between 5 and 6 minutes. And the reason I can't pinpoint it better than that is because you only get it in minutes. I can't tell you 5 minutes and 20 seconds. But she lay there over 5 minutes screaming in pain, asking somebody to help her. Now, had that bed alarm been on, the moment she tried to exit the bed, it would have gone off, and somebody, whether it was mom's nurse or another staff member, would have gone into the room and said, "Hold on, you can't get up." Um, the codes that Tavi was talking about, um, one came, what they didn't say that she actually had a cardiac arrest, but she had one code where everything, her blood pressure dropped, and her heart rate dropped down low enough that they called a team. And the second time was 2 days after they gave her the blood transfusions, when Tavi was explaining that mom was just saying, "I love you, I love you, I love you." Tavi called me and said, "Would you call her and see if you can make sense of what's going on?" She did the exact same thing with me, just repeating the same words over and over and over. And in fact, she couldn't even hang up the phone. I said, "Mom, you got to hang up the phone so I can call the nurse." I wound up having to turn my phone off to be able to disconnect and then reboot the phone and call the nurse. And I said, "What is going on with her? I just tried to speak with her and she can't even have a conversation with me." They refused to do anything. At 7 o'clock the next morning, they called another code because of her mental state. So for 12 hours or so, mom lay there in some kind of, I don't even know what to call it. And because their pride would not allow them to listen to their children, to her children, and say, "We're noticing that something is wrong with our mother. You're keeping us from getting into the hospital to look at her, and we're going by what we can hear on the phone, and we're telling you something is not right." And their pride would not allow them to do anything. And the next day they had to call a code to figure out, they called it a rapid response team, came in to figure out exactly what's going on with her. And that's when they ordered the MRIs of her head and all that to find out had she had a stroke. But that's the level of negligence that was going on at this hospital. You asked Tavi how it made her feel not being able to get into the hospital and stand at the bedside. And that image has gone through my head repeatedly over the last 4.5 years. And what always pops up for me is, imagine standing like on the other side of a jail cell, watching somebody torture a loved one, and you can't get through the bars. It's like and they pull the curtain and you can't even see it. And you're just feeling around in the dark for any bit of information that can.
Knowing something's wrong.
But yeah, and you're trying to tell them, and they're saying, "No, it's not." And then you're seeing dancing nurses on YouTube, and you're going, "Who in the state of Florida is paying attention to this?" And I point my finger at the legislature. This is on your hands, and it has been for 35 years. The legislature has created this scenario that families have to go through. And this is what their subsection 8 law is doing to people. This is the unintended consequence of ill-conceived legislation, and it's all based on how much money the lobbyists give to the legislature to get them to pass laws like this, because I guarantee you it was not a citizen of Florida or a doctor who went to say, hey, can y'all write a law that prevents us from getting into court and holding the doctor accountable? I promise you it wasn't people who have to use those hospitals. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go off on that. I'll try to calm back down. Um,
It's okay.
Yeah, Missy, you had asked Tavi a question about why she was on Lasix. I won't get into a deep medical explanation, but along with mom's respiratory problem, she also had what's called atrial fibrillation, but she had been living with that for years and years. And somebody at 92 years old, you're concerned about them having congestive heart failure, and that just means a bunch of fluid buildup, around the heart and in the heart muscle. So they routinely give them Lasix to get rid of any excess fluid. So when they do that, it causes the person to need to urinate more frequently.
And they would know that as soon as
Ex-
they gave it
exactly.
to her.
So let's stack these things on top of each other. Number one, mom was over 85 years old, which automatically placed her in a high fall risk category. Number two, mom was on heart and blood pressure medications that made it where if she stood up, her blood pressure could drop, which is referred to as orthostatic hypotension. Number three, they were giving her Lasix, which was pulling excess fluid out of her tissues and into her bloodstream so that the kidneys could get rid of it. Another reason that her blood pressure would drop if she stood up. Number four, they had these compression stockings on her legs, which we didn't find out until I got the medical record and saw that that's what it was. And the nurse even admitted that that's the reason that she fell. It's in the medical record that mom tried to get out of bed. She took a step. The tubing that connects the stockings to the air pump prevented her from moving forward. And I contend that they literally set up a trap for her. They tied her to a machine. She was unaware of her surroundings. She was her age, 92 years old. They were trying to say that mom was having mental problems because of a urinary tract infection. So I disagree with that because I read the lab reports and the lab reports came back that there was no growth in her urine. But if they were under that impression, that's all that matters. If they thought her mental acuity was suffering, uh, because of a urinary tract infection, they should have been more diligent in making sure that they took every precaution necessary. Uh, so you stack all these things up, and it's almost like they set her up to fall and then sat back and said, no, leave the bed alarm turned off. Let's see what happens. You know, it's disgusting. And again, the Florida legislature is responsible for this
Yep.
because that nurse is still working at that hospital. Nothing has been done about it. I did want to, looking at my notes here, I did want to, Tavi, I'm the one who told you to contact the police. When you took those pictures,
Words that you,
yeah,
okay.
when you took those pictures of mom, you sent them to me and I wrote you back, and you can go back and look at your text messages. When I
Okay.
saw those pictures, I said, you need to make a police report because
Okay.
we are not getting accurate information from the hospital. So we
Right.
need to create a record of this. And that's when you contacted the police.
Right.
And that's when we discovered that they had not reported it to what's called ACA, Agency for Healthcare Administration in Florida, which they were required to by law. It's an adverse event that should have been reported to ACA. And when we discovered that on the 13th that she wasn't in the system, that tells us that it had never been reported. So once again, they're covering for themselves. And in those two conference calls that Tavi said that Tavi told you about, there were, I have no doubt of all the people that were on that conference call with us, and we have no idea exactly how many people were in the room. I guarantee you there was a lawyer sitting in there
Oh,
because
sure.
I started asking the doctor some very pointed questions, and you could hear him stuttering around, going, "Well, I just don't have access to that." And I'd say, "It's in the medical record, man. Don't you have access to the medical? Well, I can't speak to that right now. And I'm sure the lawyers over there saying, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
And that, you see, what you asked earlier, Missy, about or what you said about in other countries, the hospitals and the doctors will come out and own their mistakes. There's actually two states in the country right now that are doing that, Michigan and Massachusetts. They've adopted that and they've seen their medical malpractice lawsuits go through the floor because the families know that no matter what we do, we can't bring that person back. We just want somebody to say this is what happened. And there is, I'll share it with you if you're interested. There's a very touching documentary that was done about three families in one of those states where they were at that hospital. And actually, I think it was Kentucky because Kentucky was looking at adopting that policy as well. And the parents of this little girl literally confronted the doctor and he said, I messed up. I I I didn't walk over to the bedside and physically put my hands on your baby and assess the problem, and it's my fault. And they said, we don't want to sue you.
Yeah.
We just
They
want
needed
somebody
the
to tell us.
acknowledgement.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. You know,
Absolutely.
it's not like we're looking for some kind of lottery ticket, which, some of the legislators have accused us of doing. And when I say us, I'm talking about other people who fall under subsection A. We're not looking for a lottery ticket. My mom lived in a small apartment, and Tavi and my brother helped her pay her rent with her Social Security money. She didn't have anything. We weren't trying to get, a lottery ticket out of this. We wanted the system to work. We want, if you can protect an alligator, you can protect my mom, and you
Yep.
didn't do it. And you're still sitting in the legislature, kicking the can down the road, coming up with every excuse in the world why you have to wait till next year to do something. And we're tired of it. We are absolutely tired of it. I'll shut up now. Yeah, it's been a challenge. That when I say that not a day has gone by since mom fell on the 2nd of May 2020 that I haven't done something towards this, that is the absolute truth. At some point in every day, I have done something to try to get this law changed or to research it to understand how all of this medical malpractice stuff works. It's it's become my life. It just
Yep.
really is.
Philip, we've talked about Daryl's mom this whole time. What was her first name?
One L, Wynelle. One L.
Okay. Just to acknowledge
Yes.
not the patient, not the mom,
Yes.
but she was also a human being
Yeah.
other than those roles.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, it was fine all the years the state of Florida wanted to tax her. They didn't mind, she was valuable to them at that point. But once she got past a certain point and she became retired, she was of no use to them. And that's exactly how they treat it, you know? And it's just infuriating to see these lawmakers every year just, they pat you on the head and tell us your story. And it's like, you've heard too many stories already. If you have not heard enough people come to Tallahassee every year or go to the delegation meetings and tell you about what happened to their loved, then you don't have a soul. Like, how many more stories do you have to tell before it finally sinks in that something's got to change?
Yep.
100, 1,000? I mean, what is the number that you're going to go, that's the one, that's the story we haven't heard yet?
And what would be the top 3 things that you would want the legislature to change?
Say that one more time, Missy.
What would be the top 3 things that you would want the legislature to change?
That's very easy. Number one, restore our rights to access the court. Now they will tell you that you have a remedy through the Department of Health. You can attack their license, but the truth of that is, even though Florida has a three strikes law, where if a doctor is found guilty of malpractice three times by the Department of Health, they're supposed to remove his license. You can go to the Department of Health website right now and see where doctors have been found negligent, up to the biggest one I found was 19 times, and he still has an active license. So that is no remedy. Don't so number one, restore our right to access the courts so that we can bring this to the public's eye. That way, other people get to hear about this doctor, and if his attorneys prove that the malpractice didn't happen, great, you know. But Florida has a very specific law in Chapter 766, and they call it pre-suit requirements. In Florida, before you can even file a medical malpractice suit, within 90 days of you discovering what you believe is medical malpractice, you have to notify the other side that you intend to bring a suit. And then you have 90 days for the two sides to get together and hash it out and figure out if there really is a suit. And I happen to agree with that law. That's a good law. It keeps frivolous suits from being able to get in to clog up the courts. So when they tell you that, oh, if we let everybody be able to sue, the courts will just be clogged up, that's ridiculous. Chapter 766 has a provision to deal with that. So why don't the lawmakers read the actual laws that they write, and they would know that. If I can find it, they can find it. So that's number one. Number two is do an internal investigation of the Department of Health and turn it upside down and shake out all of the bureaucrats who work there and get them to understand that you're dealing with human lives. Okay. I am absolutely convinced that our case could have gotten before the Board of Nursing if I had not pissed off a lawyer who works with the Department of Health. We made it through the investigation. The investigator at the Department of Health thought we had a solid case. She passed it on to what's called the prosecutorial unit, where it's lawyers who review what the investigator did and decide, is there enough here to send it to the probable cause panel? So we made it through step two. When it got to step three, the probable cause panel, who is going to decide whether or not it should go before the Board of Nursing, I got a letter from the attorney that was on that case, and I wrote her back and I asked her a question. And when she responded, she cited a statute, and the only word she put under that was govern yourself accordingly. Now, I remember from my time in the military, if somebody said govern yourself accordingly, they were being very nasty to you. In other words, mess around and find out, you know. So I went to a website where lawyers will share information, and I presented the question to them and said, if you received this from an attorney, how would you take it? And every one of them agreed with me that it was a very nasty way for an attorney to write. So I wrote back to that attorney's boss, and I copied a bunch of people above her boss. And when I very soon after that got a letter back saying, we're closing your case. You have, I think it was it 60 days to appeal our decision. So I sat down and I started writing, and I covered absolutely everything I could possibly cover. And there were 45 pages in my appeal. 22 of them were the actual appeal. The other 23 were all of the citations for what I had in the appeal. I emailed it to him, and I sat here at my computer that morning watching the clock, waiting it for B to be the exact day and time that my mom fell. And I clicked send so that it would be time stamped with the day and time that and I just did that for me. Within an hour, I got back an email from the attorney saying, uh, we've decided against your appeal. We no longer have to talk to you. And that was it. And I thought, there is no way you read 22 pages of legal jargon and looked up 23 pages of citations in less than an hour. Nobody can do that. So I'm convinced that it was because I challenged them, and that's why they closed it. And
Yep.
and number three, I would make it where it's that they would start the state would start addressing medical malpractice as a systems error type of situation versus a blame type situation. And here's what I mean by that. I know we're coming up close to 2 hours here, very close to it. If you look at, and I learned this from watching a video about an engineer who worked with NASA, and airline and NASA industries are very high risk industries. A mistake in those industries can be devastating. So when something goes wrong, they approach it through a systems error type point of view. What in the system failed to cause this mission to go so wrong? And they don't start pointing at this scientist and that engineer and all of that. They look at it by us. Well, that's what Massachusetts and Michigan are doing. They're looking at it as a systems issue. So, and where that would apply to our situation, think about an airplane pilot. He flies his airplane from Nashville to Memphis, gets out, goes in the coffee shop, stretches his legs, goes back to his plane. By law, he is required to get out his pre flight checklist and go over his pre flight again, even though he just got out of the airplane. Well, it should be that serious in a hospital. The policy says that if a bed is equipped with an alarm, the alarm is to be on at all times. No questions asked. The nurse doesn't get to override the legal department. And I can guarantee you the reason that there is a policy for that is because something happened in the past to make them write that policy. So if there is a safety policy, it is to be followed at all times. And the hospital thought it was important enough that they wrote a policy. The nurse was the one who decided she wasn't going to follow it. And under the laws of negligence, she was negligent in doing
Yep.
that. So those are the three things that I would do.
Very important.
So,
Yes.
any closing thoughts by either one of you? I'm sorry I started rambling here at the end.
That's okay. I just want to thank you, Philip, for allowing me the opportunity to do this. I hope it helps. And thank you, Missy. I'll probably be talking to you again. I have lots of trauma issues to discuss. So, but I appreciate both of your time in allowing me to do this. And I hope I did all right in your eyes, Philip.
You did. You did fine.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Y'all hold on for just a second and we'll say goodbye. Everybody who watches this, please share it, like it, send it to your legislators. They need to hear it.